The Great Pyramids were built 2,500 years before the birth of Christ. That's over 4,500 years ago. And yet, despite their age, these pyramids are still among the most impressive structures on Earth. And we can't help but wonder at the engineering and organizational skills it took to build such a monument in such an inhospitable place. But there is another group of people whose ingenuity was equally impressive, who created great things not with stone and mortar, but with wood and sailcloth. These are the Phoenicians. They had no vast empire, no great armies, but they ruled the waves. Their influence was felt from the Western Mediterranean all the way to the British Isles. So join us today as we take a journey back in time to learn about the greatest sailors of the ancient world. We begin our story around the Mediterranean coast of what is now Lebanon and Syria, around 1500 BC. It was here that the Phoenicians originated, establishing their first settlements along the coast and islands of this region. They were not a monolithic culture, but rather a collection of small city-states, each fiercely independent and ruled by a monarch. Though occasionally they would band together against outside threats, their rivals would soon learn that the best way to defeat a Phoenician city was to attack it from the land. For out on the sea, they were utterly without peer. The Phoenicians lived in an age when the sea was largely uncharted. Even the Greeks and Egyptians, two other great civilizations of the ancient world, largely stayed within sight of land whenever they sailed. But the Phoenicians weren't satisfied with just hugging the coastline. They wanted to explore the open sea, and so they began building ships unlike any others in the ancient world. They experimented with new designs, longer and narrower than other vessels, with deep hulls to keep them stable and fast, rigged with triangular sails that could catch the wind more efficiently. In short, the Phoenicians built some of the fastest ships of the ancient world, which enabled them to venture farther than any of their contemporaries. This skill would prove invaluable to the Phoenicians, for though they had little wealth in precious metals or natural resources, they had something far more valuable: ingenuity. Using their ships, they would travel to distant lands, bringing back raw materials that they could sell for enormous profits in the markets of the Mediterranean. Purple dye, for instance, was highly prized by the wealthy, and the Phoenicians were able to harvest it from a small sea snail found only in the far reaches of the Mediterranean. Similarly, the forests of northern Africa were filled with a type of tree that produced a unique and extremely durable wood, which the Phoenicians would use to build their ships. And so you can see how the Phoenicians could become fabulously wealthy trading goods that were rare or difficult to acquire. But even as their fortunes grew, they remained true to their roots, for they never sought to build an empire, nor did they conquer the lands they visited. Instead, they simply traded and went on their merry way, content with their ships and the sea. In fact, the Phoenicians preferred the sea to land so much that they rarely even settled in the places they visited. For instance, they established a number of colonies on the coast of Spain, but rarely spent more than a few years at a time at any one place, preferring instead to live on their ships and travel the Mediterranean. This lifestyle made them seem like ghosts, haunting the seas, appearing and disappearing at will. And it also gave them a huge advantage over their rivals, for when the Carthaginians or Greeks attacked a coastal city, they would simply hoist the sails and disappear into the horizon. There was no way their enemies could stop them. And so the Phoenicians built a vast trade network stretching from modern-day Britain all the way to Africa. They traded with everyone: the Greeks, Carthaginians, Etruscans, even the Celts. In fact, their ships were the first to reach the British Isles, where they traded tin and other raw materials with the local tribes. And yet, despite traveling so far and trading with so many different people, the Phoenicians never really interacted with any of them. For the most part, their dealings were limited to the exchange of goods, and they rarely, if ever, set foot in the places they visited. In fact, the Phoenicians were so dedicated to their maritime lifestyle that they even adapted their language to be spoken on the waves. Their original language, Canaanite, was too slow and cumbersome for use at sea, so they developed a new form of it, which consisted of only a few hundred words. This adaptation enabled them to communicate quickly and efficiently while on the water. And it may have even been used as a basis for the first international language, a common tongue that could be understood by sailors from different nations. But the Phoenicians were more than just traders. They were also innovators. Perhaps their greatest contribution to the world was their alphabet. Before the Phoenicians, writing was reserved for the elite few. The Egyptian and Mesopotamian systems of writing were incredibly complex, requiring years of study to master. But the Phoenicians simplified everything, creating a system of symbols that could be written down easily after just a few hours of instruction. Not only that, but their alphabet was also much more phonetic than its predecessors. Instead of having each symbol represent a whole word, like in Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Phoenician symbols represented individual sounds. This innovation made it much easier to write and read, and it spread quickly throughout the Mediterranean. In fact, the Greek alphabet is simply a modified version of the Phoenician one. And from there, the Latin alphabet used by English speakers today is derived, so we can thank the Phoenicians for making literacy possible for the masses. Not only were they innovators, but the Phoenicians were also incredibly tenacious. At one point, the Assyrian Empire sought to destroy them by cutting off their access to the sea. But the Phoenicians simply went around Africa to continue trading. And even when the Babylonians conquered their home territory, the Phoenicians didn't give up. Instead, they simply moved to other parts of the Mediterranean and continued on as before. Nothing could stop them. And so we come to the peak of Phoenician power, the city of Carthage. Located in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was founded by the Phoenicians around 814 BC and would go on to become one of the most powerful cities in the ancient world. Though never as extensive as their trading network, Carthage would eventually carve out an empire of its own, encompassing much of North Africa and Western Mediterranean. Despite this, however, the Phoenicians would always be known as the masters of the sea. For even as they grew in power and influence, they never forgot their roots. They maintained their focus on trade and exploration, and they continued to build the fast ships that allowed them to dominate the waves. In fact, it was these ships that would ultimately lead to the destruction of Carthage. For as the city grew in power, it inevitably came into conflict with Rome. And though Carthage would put up a good fight, Rome's legions proved too much for them to handle. After 3 devastating wars, Carthage was completely destroyed, sacked by Rome in 146 BC. And so the Phoenicians disappeared from the pages of history. Though their cities and colonies may have fallen, the legacy of the Phoenicians lives on in their contributions to shipping, navigation, and writing. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that it doesn't take an empire or a king to make history. Sometimes it just takes a few brave souls and a dream of adventure. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed learning about the Phoenicians, one of the most fascinating cultures of the ancient world. If you want to learn more about them, be sure to check out the additional resources. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.